Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We have an awesome show planned for you today. Can't hear me? You guys hear me?
Sounds off.
Sounds like a little like underwater.
Yeah.
Ooh, maybe I should get sultry with my voice a little bit. There you go.
Go ahead, Barry White.
I was going to say sultry. That's a good word right there.
There you go. That's how we start. We're just let's see. How about there? Does that sound all right?
Yeah,
It kind of feels like if I get it too close, it's like I'm eating my own beard. So it's not the most pleasant situation. But before we get into our conversation, I just want to remind everybody to make sure that they like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that they can get all of the awesomeness that is the collective every day. And then we're going to dive into some introductions here. Hopefully Shaun will join us in a second, but let's start with you, Gino. Let's talk about who you are, where you come from, a little bit of background, and then maybe your interest in Jiu Jitsu. Where'd that come from?
Definitely, man. Definitely. So, my name's Gino Collura. I'm born and raised in Tampa, Florida, in the good old U.S. of A. And been here for, golly, longer than I care to imagine. I don't want to remember how old I am because it's painful thinking about it. That's for sure.
We don't need to talk about that.
I am a behavioral scientist by trade. So what that means is I have a doctorate degree in what's called neuroanthropology. So it's neuroscience mixed with medical and cultural anthropology. And got a beautiful daughter, have a loving wife who's currently pregnant with her second child. So excited about that. And
awesome.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. But my love for jiu-jitsu, gosh, man, this one goes a little deep for me. So when I was 8 years old, my aunt was shot in the face in front of me.
Wow.
And without going, too deep into what happened, long and the short, my parents ended up putting me in judo as a means of coping with the trauma and the fear of being exposed to that scenario. And that graduated into me later participating great to.
Oh, you're breaking up there.
Gracie's fates. So this is where the love for jiu-jitsu stemmed from. Me kind of led a career worth of writing a dissertation and doing a bunch of stuff on how jiu-jitsu can help with the assimilation and acculturation process for combat veterans.
Yeah, it is being a veteran and enjoying my jiu-jitsu. I feel that it is definitely a really solid benefit. Matt, give us a little bit about yourself and some background and where your love of jiu-jitsu came from.
Yeah, I'm Matt Kwan. I am the owner and head instructor of On Guard Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Pitt Meadows, BC. I'm also one of the co-founders of BJJ Mental Models podcast. I guess I first, just like so many people, I discovered jiu-jitsu through Joe Rogan in the UFC back in the in the 2000s, and me and my friend were looking. I think he actually brought home a book from Eddie Bravo from the library, and it was him and Joe Rogan doing twisters on each other. And I was like, "Oh, what's this?" And I had loved pro wrestling growing up. I was a huge fan. Me and my buddy were both huge fans, and we're like, "Oh, this is like pro wrestling, but it's actually real." And then we looked we looked into the UFC, and of course, it was just awesome at that time. Prime time UFC. And then I took my first class, and he did a first class with me as well, but he didn't stick with it. But I knew right away the first time I grappled with someone, I was like, this is definitely the sport for me. I had played sports growing up, hockey, soccer, and football, and quite honestly, I was pretty unathletic and not talented in any way. And no one in my family played sports. And then when I tried jiu-jitsu, I just immediately had a connection with the sport. And I noticed after, a couple months of training that, hey, I'm actually doing really well. And I felt like this was the first thing that I had ever done physically that was where I had maybe a little bit of talent in it. And then fast forward, about 15 years, I'm here. I got a business. I got a wife and 2 kids. and life is beautiful being a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy owner. So that's my story here.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Seb, you're up. Give us a little blurb about
Yes.
yourself.
Hi, fellas. Yeah, I'm Seb Lavoie. I've been engaged with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really at the fundamental level since 93, just like Matt. The first time I saw this skinny dude going on, in the octagon and do the thing and proliferate some magic for us and after 700 years of imagining what would happen if they collided, it was kind of great to see it firsthand, and I was immediately hooked. I didn't start until much later in life, but the framework was laid. I literally, felt it was the greatest martial arts as far as I was concerned. In 2001, I went for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Academy. Actually, I was in the military before that, so I did some combatives. Then I moved over to the RCMP, and I had a sort of an initiation, so to speak, to ground fighting by way of the police academy. And I was out in 2001, and in about 2010, when I joined the emergency response team full time, which is kind of a SWAT team for the U.S. guys. I ended up having to not only partake, but also proliferate and help others develop in the combatives realm. So I started sort of learning from various sources so that I could put stuff together, some combative stuff together for the team. And so this became a pursuit over the next couple of years, where all I did is lead, aside from obviously tactical operation, all I did was to lead the combatives program. And when I turned into a team leader on the team, I continued carrying portfolio, and it remained with me until I left in 2019. And now I just, when the guys are visiting, I'm just happy to see them and do some combatives with them. But that's pretty much where I have a ex-wife, two kids with a girlfriend. So it's all a big mess, but it's working. It's working.
Good times. It's a mess, but it's good times, right? That's where we go. You know what, Shaun? I don't think we've ever really gotten into your background here on Collective, but perhaps you could give us a little blurb about yourself.
First of all, I'll apologize for showing up a couple of minutes late. I was on a live actually promoting this live chat, so my bad. Sorry, boys.
We'll forgive you.
Thanks. My background, I started martial arts in 1981-ish, judo, my dad. And so I started judo then, and then I jumped into the military, continued on with martial arts. Did that usual unarmed combat instructor thing, that whole combatives thing, and et cetera, into the teams. And then when I left the teams, I stayed in martial arts. And so there's never been a time in my life when I haven't done some form of martial art. And I've done several different styles, all the way from traditional right through to when I thought I wanted to be a ninja. I still want to be a ninja. And so I've done
We all want to be that.
Who doesn't? I don't even like you if you don't like ninjas. So I've done a bunch of different martial arts. In respect to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I started that over 7 years ago when I turned 52. It was on the week that I turned 52. I just got it in my head. Well, that's a martial art I've never properly given a kick at, so I'm going to go tie a white belt on. And so now I'm a lowly purple belt, still trying to figure out which way is up, but I do all right, I suppose, for an old dude. But I love on the BJJ. It's my favorite martial art, without a doubt. It's not a matter of it's the most effective or it's the best or it's whatever. All I can say is I love on it. It works for me.
Mm-hmm. It is it's just so much fun. And for those that don't know, I guess I should give myself a little background on this. I grew up, getting beat up by my brother. That was the initial part of it. And he studied Taekwondo for many years, so I got really fast at being able to block head kicks. And this arm can cut it's super quick. But I studied some Taekwondo with him. I studied some karate. Well, I guess in Shaun's terminology, I dabbled in both of those. I didn't put any really.
We all do from time to time.
And then I studied wushu for a few years, which was really awesome and cool. I love the art, but then I joined the Army. Didn't really do much in there, then I got out and I found jiu-jitsu due to Jocko, actually. I was listening to what I listened to like probably 60 or 70 of the podcast, and then I was finally like, maybe there's something about this. He talks about it all the time. Maybe I should go check it out. I went out, did one class. I got tied in knots by a 16-year-old girl, and I was hooked. I was like, okay, if this works this well, I'm in. And I'm being told that I'm up for my purple belt soon. So
Nice.
We'll see. But we all here now have a general understanding of where we all come from, how we got into the sports. And the first thing I want to go into before we go really into too deep about this is the We Defy Foundation. So Seb, I'm going to throw you into the fire here first. Tell us a little bit about what it is. What we had initially planned to get Alan Shabaro here, but he was unable to make it due to conflicting schedules, is the way life is. But Seb's going to be here. He's going to tell us all about it. So, Seb, tell us about the We Defy Foundation.
Alan is probably taking souls somewhere. He's being discreet about it.
Well,
we won't tell anybody.
On that note, Seb, you'd said, hey, have you watched any of Alan's fights? And so yesterday I watched some of them, and I literally saw a guy's soul evaporate in midair before the dude hit the mat. And so I thought, wow, yeah, there goes another soul.
Yeah.
He is a savage, and he doesn't have a concept of what pulling guard is. He just throws people on their heads.
I love it.
So the We Defy Foundation, I mean, in a nutshell, because even though I was familiar with the foundation, I wasn't involved in a potential prospective Canadian version of it, which is precisely what I'm going to kind of talk about here. But Alan approached me. I was familiar with the We Defy Foundation. I was familiar with Reorg in the UK that does a very similar work. And now We Defy, as I understand it, is also in Australia and the UK as well. And so you have, various countries that has serious contribution to the war effort, whatever that means, and bring their people back with some psychological or physiological injuries, and for them to have an avenue to rehab, so to speak, through jiu-jitsu, which is a fantastic idea. And of course, and we'll get into this with the good doctor, but for me it was all about, is this science based, is this anecdotal, those types of things. But when Alan approached me with a PhD level paper on the benefits of jiu-jitsu for vets, I was all over it, just in terms of establishing those real connections instead of just anecdotally having these conversations. And that's going to help, I think, the people that are generally on the fence, that are just kind of, well, it's kind of cultish. Well, you need to have some science behind it, and you can understand it, and it should help you make a decision. So I digress. So Alan Shabaro and I had a very preliminary meeting. Everything I'm talking about here, I've had a conversation with him and cleared with him in terms of, what I was prepared to share. And we're at a very, very early inception phase of this. I am taking it on. I want to bring We Defy to Canada. I think we need it. It's going to look a little bit different than how the United States is doing it, for the reason that the U.S., nobody can match the U.S. in terms of how many vets are injured on any given street blocks. They have so many soldiers and military service people that are hurting. We can't. It'd be very difficult with an army of 100,000 to even come close to those numbers. So for me, there was a tie-in there with the first response world, and so I don't know exactly where this is going to go. Proper. I know that police for sure, and then we'll talk about fire and EMS, and see if we can bring this on as well. But basically, what the movement does, is establishes if somebody is quote unquote if somebody sort of satisfied the threshold that they need to satisfy, and this hasn't been established here in Canada. In the States, they have a disability rating with the Veterans Affairs, those types of things. I don't know if I'm going to get all deep into that, so I don't know yet how this is going to look in Canada. But in the States, if you reach a certain level of disability, you are far from being disabled, but you are given an administrative level of disability from the VAC, then the We Defy Foundation can and will provide you with some free training lessons, pay for your membership, basically your garment, everything. And so you're basically paid to do the jiu-jitsu thing. So whoever you're taking your jiu-jitsu with is actually receiving your membership fees, your membership dues from the We Defy Foundation, which is absolutely insane if you think about it.
Yeah. That's
So
wicked.
yeah. So where we're at now with this is, as I said, I received the blueprint and the We Defy US. They were amazing in sending me the absolute blueprint on how this works and how it was implemented on an administrative, logistical, supportive, like everything level. And so now I'm reviewing this. This is going to a business lawyer and a business accountant so we can establish the way forward in terms of establishing this this nonprofit organization. And I'm hoping to kick it off, with some seminars and some things, and have Alan come over and for people to be able to learn from him and others.
And just get thrown on their heads, right? Like that's what we were just talking about. Just come in.
I volunteer,
Come on
Matt.
in. There you go. Matt gets off on his head right away. So this sounds amazing. And, we have something similar up here, right? Where I'm of a certain percentage disabled.
Sure.
Right. And my massage therapist gets paid directly through the VA. So if the We Defy Foundation can get this set up so that it can alleviate the financial stress of it, boom, get more people on the mats, get them going. Now, well, I have one quick question from the internet that I have to ask because it's kind of hilarious. The first question, don't lie, we all fantasize about jiu-jitsuing a bear, guillotine and paw sweep, or rear naked with hooks. Had to ask live, see your reaction. So, anybody want to field this question? Is it going to work?
Well, it depends. Is this a grizzly or a brown bear? That makes a
there
difference.
You go.
I think.
That does make a difference, right?
The only way to negate speed, power, and athleticism is to take the back. So if it's a grizzly, I want that.
There you go.
Yeah,
grab on the hump.
now you got to
Agreed
work
and
with the
concurred.
grizzly's hump.
Exactly.
Depends on if you're Khabib or not.
There you go.
Truth.
It's Habib.
Khabib,
Correct.
right.
Correct. Unless it's a grizzly, then it's Khabib.
Okay, so with that out of the way, I'm going to save the rest of the questions as they come up till later on the program so we can get through some of the information here right off the bat. But that one
Sorry,
was
I'd
too
like
good
to
not
ask
share.
a clarifying question
For sure.
to Seb. So with that in mind, and I'm unsure, of course, how far you are into the process, but you raised the example of VAC, or Veterans Affairs Canada, possibly covering some of these things. And I'll use myself as an example as a veteran. Though it doesn't look it, I have more than 100% disability rating from Veterans Affairs Canada based on the 20 pages of injuries that I've got from back in the day that are all legitimized through MRIs and CAT scans and blah, 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 draw the blood, look in my ears, all of that good stuff. And so as I stand here right now, I don't look 100+% disabled, but on paper, I am. And I can still do jiu-jitsu, of course. I can't do it like I used to be able to pre-injuries, but I do all right. Now, from the perspective of Veterans Affairs Canada, here I am out in Roslyn paying my monthly dues, as I always do on the BJJ mats. How have you had any conversations with any institutions, or how would you see that kind of unfolding, or have you given that any thought yet?
I have given it some thoughts, but it's very preliminary because I literally opened the email with the blueprint sort of yesterday. Yes, there will be a conversation with VAC. It's impossible not to have that conversation, but also based on the numbers being a lot lower, will it be necessary is the question. And so, because at the end of the day, it kind of becomes a bit of a gatekeeping thing where you want people that legitimately have, some either physiological or psychological injuries. Like you don't want just somebody that doesn't want to pay for their jiu-jitsu membership to come through the pipeline if you don't have the right vetting process, so to speak, without being too technical with that. But so I have no idea, but I can tell you this. Every stakeholder in Canada that has and can help will be brought in. Like this isn't about who takes the credit for bringing this in. This is about a team effort. how do we bring it in and how do we make it as successful as possible? And this isn't going to be a me affair. It's going to be a community affair.
Well, of course, I'm happy to engage in any way possible that I can to lend supporting fire. And of course, it's an easy, I can think of a number of guys that are easy case studies for the benefits of jiu-jitsu in respect to PTSD or psychological, emotional supporting fire from BJJ. So happy to help in any way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Ditto. Speaking of that, let's dive into that. Let's talk about some of the psychological benefits. Gino, I'm going to put you on the fire here.
Yeah, man.
For myself, I mean, I saw huge. Again, these are just anecdotal stories. These are my experience, right? There's no science behind this, but I saw leaps and bounds in my own recovery and my own healing of post-traumatic stress and depression through jiu-jitsu. But let's talk about some of the science behind it. What makes it so beneficial?
Whoo! How much?
Yeah.
We've got less than 2 hours.
I got a 350-page dissertation.
We'll all buy the book.
Let's boil that down to about 5 minutes.
Can you give us the Cole's notes?
All right. So at the 40,000-foot view, right? So from a component's perspective as a human being, and one thing that I really want to make sure that I stress is the fact that, look, we are all human beings and not human machines. Right. And there's this idea from an operational tempo perspective that you have to operate very fast and you have to operate very efficiently in whatever it is that you're doing to achieve an objective, to execute on a mission. Right. That is a blueprint that is established within our combat veteran community. Right. That is military doctrine. No two ways about it. Right. So when you take a look at this idea of how do I go from operating at a certain level, at a certain tempo, right, on a regular basis, dealing with incredible amounts of trauma and stress and drive, to now I'm in a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, sitting in a cubicle, stuck in traffic, having to deal with passive aggressive behaviors with office people, and it's plus family issues. It's totally different, right? It's a new way to look at life. So what's the missing piece, right, from a psychological perspective? There's a very real high associated with going to war and being deployed, right? All of you guys can relate to that. That high is something that is very hard to replace as a civilian in civilian life, right? Because you don't get exposed to that level of being on the red line. And to be very frank, that line between life and death, right? When you are constantly tap dancing on that thing and you just don't know what tomorrow is going to hold. You don't know what the next 10 minutes are going to hold. Where civilian life is very predictable and you have a mundane grind and it's the same thing over and over again, there's some gaps that start to be created. So when you take a look at what jiu-jitsu offers at a psychological level, there's a few things, right? So first and foremost, let's talk about the warrior ethos. I'm sure all of you guys are familiar with that, right? And this idea of, look, there's an identity, and identity management is a huge thing when it comes to psychological impact of jiu-jitsu. But when you take a look at what does it take to achieve a certain level of understanding that, look, yes, I am a human being. Yes, I am a husband. Yes, I am a father or a wife or whatever the case is. But I'm also a warrior, and I never, ever, ever lose that, right? But how do I continue to feed that identity to maintain an equilibrium, right, with a blueprint that was set in my mind and was sealed through blood, sweat, and tears and camaraderie that is combat? But yet all of a sudden now you're telling me that chapter is over and I never, ever get to tap back into that identity ever again? That's just not true, right? And jiu-jitsu offers a way for you to put pedal to the metal, go 100%, right? Because we're not striking, right? So like we can roll and we can roll hard, or we can flow roll depending on whatever it is that you're doing. But I am putting forward a very strong effort. And it's a chess game, right? Like I know at any given time, right? You can take my back or you can armbar me or guillotine or whatever the case may be, and back and forth. So there's this idea of I'm in the fight. I'm actively in the fight. And when I go to train and I go through the first, call it 30, 40 minutes of class, and I'm learning a few new techniques, in the last 20 minutes we roll, I know every single day when I go to class, there's a fight, right? And I get to put myself and test myself on a very regular basis. So now we start talking about a reward system, right? Now I have this idea of a flood of dopamine and serotonin and even oxytocin that creates these bonds, right, with guys and gals that I share the mat with. And it is baptized and sealed in combat. It's hand-to-hand, close-quarter combat. That is 110% what it is. but you don't have to deal with the components of loss and the levels of trauma, right, that you would see on a battlefield. But on the same token, it's feeding a socially acceptable model of combat because it is a sport and allowing you to exert a lot of physical energy and at the same time mentally put you in a space that is a huge part of who you are and your identity, right? So that is one aspect on the warrior ethos. The second side of that, right, is let's talk about this idea of collective consciousness. Have you guys ever heard that term before?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Would you explain it for anybody that hasn't, though?
Yeah, absolutely, right? So there's a French sociologist that came up with this, Emily Durkheim. And collective consciousness basically says this: when you are in a group of people, right, and you are doing something collectively towards the same type of objective, there is a bond and a deep understanding that's created that doesn't require talking, right? So now I want you guys to think about what happens the moment I slap and bump, right, on a mat and we start rolling. I don't need to talk. You don't need to talk. Our bodies are communicating with one another. And at any given time, I can look left and I can look right, and I can see my fellow training partners and academy friends doing the same exact thing. So when we get done that night and we all slap hands and hug each other, right, that bond, that collectivity creates a different type of conscious awareness of my environment, of myself, and my place in the world, and that I do have a sense of belonging that is much more than what I get in the workplace. It's something that speaks to my soul. It speaks to my mind. It speaks to my heart, because it takes me back to a space where I had a camaraderie and a brotherhood and a sisterhood with folks that I was deployed with, right? And I experienced things that the average person could never even fathom, right? So it brings back this concept of, let me continue to nurture that warrior identity, that warrior ethos, so I can work through these different challenges. One of the biggest things in the 7 years I did my study, a huge challenge that participants had was going and talking to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and they always would refer to them as white coats, right? There's no way, and they would tell me, there's no way a white coat will ever understand what it is that I went through, and they're just gonna, give me a script for Paxil, Zoloft, and then tell me to do cognitive behavioral therapy once a week, twice a week, right? Mm-hmm. That didn't move the needle for them. I'm not saying it doesn't work for some people, right? But for the folks that I was studying and working with, did it move the needle. 3 months of jiu-jitsu, 3 months, changed your life, completely changed your life. It was worth more to them than any medication and any therapy that they could have gotten elsewhere. Now, for my population, that worked. Again, it doesn't mean it works for everybody that way, right? But for them, it absolutely worked. So, yes, go ahead.
Matt's got a question for you.
Yeah.
Matt, jump on, man. What do you got?
Yeah, so that all makes total sense in terms of veterans coming back and really trying to maintain that warrior identity. I mean, I'm not a veteran, but I totally know what you mean. When you train martial arts and like you just it does, especially if you're so passionate that it becomes your life. You walk around with this identity of a warrior, whether you want to or not. Like you're always walking down the street. You're always thinking tactically, like, okay, where's my escape exits? If this person were to do this, what's my next move, right? Like jiu-jitsu just kind of naturally instills those thinking mechanisms in your brain in everyday life. I guess my question to you is, and I have an idea of what I think the answer may be, in terms of, veterans returning and going to jiu-jitsu as a means of therapy, what is it about jiu-jitsu specifically that is therapeutic compared to other martial arts? And before you answer, I would want to make some assumptions that I have.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you have veterans that are recovering from PTSD and things like this, trauma to the head, like kickboxing and MMA, it makes sense to me why that wouldn't be the ideal therapy, because it is essentially more like a fight. When you're striking, it's more, MMA. Anyone who's done MMA classes, there is still a level of camaraderie, but it's slightly different than in jiu-jitsu, especially in a competitive setting, because people are trying to beat the crap out of each other still, even though we're teammates or whatever. We're still like trying to assert ourselves, and it's more of a fight. Whereas jiu-jitsu, quite often, it's playful, it's rolling around, potentially, not always, but potentially low impact. So if we were to take the striking martial arts out of the picture, like, okay, we know that maybe MMA or Muay Thai or boxing is maybe not the best option as like a therapy, but like, what makes jiu-jitsu compared to other grappling martial arts? Like, why aren't veterans gravitating towards wrestling? Why aren't they gravitating towards sambo? Why aren't they gravitating towards judo? These are all martial arts that are grappling. There's no striking. Is it because jiu-jitsu is more gentle? Is it and just to top that question off, in my personal experience, I've trained all of those martial arts in some way, shape, or form, except for maybe sambo. But what I've noticed is there's nothing that compares to the level of camaraderie in a jiu-jitsu school. Like when you go to a judo school, yeah, you have your friends and you train with them or whatever, but you're still trying to throw each other into the ground. And it seems to me like it's different than a jiu-jitsu setting. You know, at the end of my classes, people are sitting around chatting, and for whatever reason, the bond that you get through ground fighting seems to be, in my opinion, like the bonds that you make are deeper and they seem more like friendships than other martial arts. Anyways, I know it's a long-winded question, but essentially,
it's a great question.
What is it?
Great question.
What is it that makes jiu-jitsu so compared to other martial arts, especially grappling martial arts? What makes it so beneficial, and why are veterans gravitating towards jiu-jitsu specifically?
So I love this question. I've been asked this question several times, and I absolutely love it. So thank you for asking it. So first and foremost, let's break down two things, right? Vulnerability and trust. Okay. When you take a look at how it is when we train jiu-jitsu, the amount of time that we spend in very, very vulnerable positions, right? When I say vulnerable, I'm saying that from a primal evolutionary perspective. My neck on your neck, right? My center mass on your center mass. Very close proximity, right? And you guys know connected is protected, right? So like as we stay tight and we stay touched, there is a lot. It's like I'm hugging you right, for a long time, but we're actually doing and we're working stuff right at the same moment, right? Think of pulling guard. I mean, you're exposing, right, your entire lower body to somebody, and you have to have a level of trust with your training partner, right? That's why whenever you're training with someone who's new, there's a little bit of let me feel this person out. And especially like we all know, like white belts are the most dangerous people in the mat, right? Because they don't know what they don't know, and they're just kind of all over the place, right? So I say that to say over time, right, when you expose what it is that the other person is made of, and you guys know this, when you train long enough with somebody, you without really even talking, you learn their character quite a bit, right? Like you learn, like, does this guy have fight in him, right? Is he strategic or is he spastic? And there is no words that are needed, right? It's just body language, but it's close proximity body language, right? Which is very, very different than me, boxing or doing Muay Thai, even judo, right? Even though obviously judo and jiu-jitsu are so closely related, there is a difference from a tachiwaza perspective and starting on your feet and having that space and that distance between two people versus we're going to slap bump and I'm going to go right into side control, or I'm going to go into your guard, right? Or I'm going to take your back. It changes things, right? So that lends itself to trust, right? If I spend that amount of time, right, back and forth with many different bodies on a mat, I start to kind of open up this box of, there was a point in time in my life where the only people I could relate to and I could trust were the guys that I went to war with, the guys that I deployed with. Now I'm rolling on a mat with civilians and people that I've never been to war with, but we train and I know what they're made of. They know what I'm made of. And now we start to have this other type of bond, right? That is sealed through a warrior ethos. It's a little bit different, but it still speaks, right, to what it is that resonates with folks who are combat veterans. So what makes it different is trust and vulnerability. That is the direct byproduct of being so closely and intimately tight with someone and having areas like you guys are from a tactical perspective.
You broke up.
I am going to get into a street altercation. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep, we're good to go ahead.
Your neighbor's Wi-Fi. You got to stop stealing it.
Go ahead. You can carry on.
It's a daily battle. But the last thing you ever want to do in a street altercation, right, is go chest to chest and bow up with somebody, right? Because now all my vital organs are exposed, right? Well, think about what we do in jiu-jitsu. We are exposing all of our vital organs to one another, right? But we trust, right, that you're going to respect the tap. And when you put me in an arm bar, you're not going to rip my arm off, right? So as soon as I hit you with the tap, I know and I have the confidence that you're going to pull back. And that is very different than me getting into a sparring session in a boxing ring and I start eating some punches, right? And then someone gets a little overly confident, and then I stumble, boom, and they knock me out, right? Like that's traumatic, right? Where jiu-jitsu, yes, you could have that happen, but it's nowhere near as prevalent. Nowhere near as prevalent. Does that answer your question?
That is such a great answer. Because if you roll with like someone from a judo background, a lot of the time it's just like what you say. They're so used to keeping distance and fighting for grips, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, they throw you and they land on you hard, and then like the fight's over. And wrestling, you're kind of hand fighting, then all of a sudden someone shoots in, someone sprawls. It's very hard impact, smacking all over each other. Whereas jiu-jitsu, it's kind of like, oh, just come here and like go in between my legs here. And then so could you say that so two things I wanted to sort of add on top of that. So I guess number one, like the close proximity and the physical contact and kind of the communication between two bodies opens up a different level of trust, where two people are so comfortable next to each other, or one is behind the other. It's so different from judo, where if someone's in judo and they're on their back, or if a wrestler's on their back, they freak out. They do not feel like, oh, this is a good place to be. They feel like, oh my God, I'm drowning here and I need to move. So number one, would it be that closeness, that proximity? I think you already answered that, like that trust. I really think that that's a really great answer. But could it also be that one of the hallmarks of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is it is the winning conditions of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu compared to other martial arts? It's not about pinning, it's not about throwing, it's about finishing the fight. And so do you think veterans look at that and they say, well, this is like the closest I can be to taking someone and putting them away in a realistic setting through a strangle or through a joint lock, instead of just like pinning you, you know what I mean? Or in judo, like if I throw you, that's great, I threw you, but often you would end up on the bottom even, and then it's like, oh well, I won. It's like, yeah, but the fight is not really completed, and you know what I mean? So because of the different rule sets, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it sees the fight through to completion. And do you think that also has an effect when we're talking about like the warrior ethos and trying to maintain that identity as a warrior, just naturally gravitating to the fact that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu goes to until someone gives up, not until you get pinned or not until you get thrown?
So, I will tell you that I have not studied that particular side of it in depth. What I would offer, though, just for as far as food for thought, right, there is absolutely a parallel between mission completion and mission failure, right? When you start thinking about in terms of military context. So to your point, Matt, the idea of there being some sort of finality, right, of we've gotten to this place, this is what I did, and I successfully achieved my objective of getting the tap, right? That's one thing. The second thing I would add to that, though, is instead of looking at it from that perspective, there's something in my discipline, it's a saying, and the saying is this: the quality and depth of relationship you have with yourself will always define the quality and depth of relationship you can have with someone else. What jiu-jitsu offers from cultivating a level of proprioception, right, as far as my body's interaction with the external environment and people that are around it, what it offers when it comes to understanding of who I am, right? Like the daily struggle on the mat, because all of us tap others. Like that's just the nature of the exchange of what we're doing. But every single time that happens, I'm learning a little bit more about myself, a little bit more about my body, a little bit more how to react to stress, how to embrace the suck, how to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. We're fighting on the ground, right? We're bipedal beings. We walk everywhere we go, and yet we're choosing to go to the ground because obviously balance, leverage, so on and so forth. So I think there's something to be said about that, as well as that the depth that it pushes you. I mean, my gosh, man, some of the conversations that exist that are out there between very high level practitioners as far as the philosophy of jiu-jitsu, right? I mean, like Eddie Bravo and Joe Rogan are prime examples. Those dudes go pretty deep, right? As far as like really unpacking their understanding of
you mean on the flat planet, or?
I'm not even going to that one, Shaun.
I'm just adding that for context.
Let's ask. We got a couple combat veterans here. We got a few right here. Like Shaun, Seb, do you guys find that one of the benefits or one of the things that feels right about jiu-jitsu is that there's a finality to it. Like you get the tap. Okay, cool. Mission objective done. Move on forward.
But hold on, let me just say one thing. It's not even necessarily that you complete the mission, because the other martial arts, you can still complete the mission, but the mission is not to pin someone or to throw someone where potentially the fight continues in a real situation. But it's like, okay, this is the closest thing that we can do without hitting each other, where the win conditions involve someone submitting. And is it something about the submission aspect as opposed to like, you know, if you're in a fight and you pin someone's shoulders on the floor, like, yeah, you could probably do considerable damage, but like, it doesn't take you might not take the actual life out of them. They might still want to fight. Whereas if you submit someone,
right.
If you submit someone, they're like, okay, I give up because I'm about to go to sleep, or I'm about to sustain serious injury. Is there something about that? That makes it more attractive, and B, perhaps strengthens the bond even more, because with me, when I get tapped out by training partners or I tap them out, it's almost like kind of in high school when there's that bully that's messing with you and then you fight, and then after you're like, oh my God, I have like more respect for you. You know what I mean? Like I
all of a sudden become best friends.
Totally. Like there's an aspect to that. And I'm wondering if jiu-jitsu is different from other martial arts in that way, because the end goal is submission.
Shaun, let's start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, so there's lots of good stuff there, and I'm glad we're having this kind of a conversation because it doesn't happen frequently enough. And I'm out of this conversation as we proceed, and already it's happened. There's things that have bubbled up to the surface that have got me thinking, we need to talk about this a little bit more. So to the initial question, how did I deal with BJJ, or what did BJJ mean to me, or what did it offer to me when I first started? Well, the night that I went down there, I didn't know any of the characters on the mat, and there was some instruction done, and they're all kind of eyeballing me to see what I was about, as one does when a new guy steps onto the mat. And then it was kind of okay, now we're going to roll. And I thought, well, we're rolling. I don't even know what that means, but let's roll. And so I went through 3 5-minute rounds where these guys kind of came hard at me. And by they came hard at me, what I really mean is I didn't know what was happening. And so I came hard at them. Like when they grabbed me, I grabbed them. When they went to throw me, I thought, no, you didn't. I've been doing judo a long time. I understand base posture structure. I don't know where any of this is going, but it's freaking game on now, boys, because you're coming at me hard. I'm going to come at you harder. And so to that point, and that's why this conversation is so important, when I entered into BJJ, I didn't know what the rule set was. I didn't know what the outcome was. I didn't know even what I was trying to accomplish in it. I was just trying to figure it out. And I didn't feel like it wasn't explained to me what it might offer, where it might take me, what it could mean for me in the future. I showed up and thought, oh, we're scrapping. Let's scrap. And so to Matt's point on the finishing aspect, I never thought that way. So when someone was trying to tap me out, this is what went through my head. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that I was clear-headed. I'm not saying that anyone should think this, but here's what I thought. When that armbar was starting to go on, and the guy said to me, hey, you should tap or I'll break your arm. Here's what I thought. Dude, that's the start of the fight. You break my arm, I'm going to freaking kill you, is what I thought. Not like literally kill you, but I'm going to put the hurt on you once you break my arm. Because eventually, once my arm's broken, I'm going to beat you with my other arm. And so that's how I thought as a veteran, because I was taught to no quit. I was taught to kick ass. I was taught to adapt and overcome. And if someone's taken my arm off to the shower room because they just broke it, I'm going to chase you into the shower room and beat you with my arm. That's just how I was raised. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's smart. I'm saying that's who I was. And that's still kind of who I am, because that's what I was taught to be on the teams in JTF2 and preceding JTF2. So this conversation is important because there isn't just a single entry into BJJ as a veteran. Veterans come in many shapes and sizes and many different mindsets and many different understandings. And though at that point I'd already been doing martial arts for many years, I was entering into a new version of a martial art that I knew very little about. I didn't know what was expected of me. I didn't know where it was going. I was just into it. So it's great that we're having this conversation. I suppose what I'm saying is I don't want to generalize too much about veterans step in. It's step 1, 2, 3, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. The outcome is predictable and blah, blah, blah. Because I don't think it is that. I think the most important thing that we could talk about in context of this is to Seb's initiative, to the We Defy idea, is the correct entry into BJJ as a veteran.
That's a great point. And the one of the issues that you bring up very, very well, Shaun, is that depends on what you did in the military, because your job kind of defines how you interact with the surrounding area. Now, if you're a door kicker, that's the mentality. Like Shaun's mentality is 100%. We're going in, and it's game on all day long. Being an engineer and dealing with explosives, everything for me was about space. I tried to make more space, which doesn't help in jiu-jitsu. So, Seb, what about yourself? What was your the initial feeling when you got in? What was the finality of it, or it's not the finality, the ability to complete the objective? Was that helpful in the initial stages of it, or no?
Nah, not really, not for me. But there was a great piece that you said in your last intervention there that I was going to address, and I totally slipped my mind. Anyways, if it comes back, I love this conversation beyond words, just because it's the first time that we have somebody such as the good doctor having that conversation about neuroscience and those types of things as it relates to jiu-jitsu and all of this. And I'm if I can add something, I really, really was surprised with you starting your chat with the warrior ethos, because I tell you why. Excuse me. It is anecdotal. It's more normative. It's not necessarily, empirical. It's very difficult to get to how do you quantify warrior ethos? What does that even mean? And from there, how do you even reach it? And when you do, is that beneficial to do again after you're done? Or is it something that goes away? So for me, I 100% believe that the warrior ethos is real. And I 100% believe that people do not grow out of it. And for me personally, when I was no longer an operator, being on the mats made me feel like I was an operator, which is weird. And I mean, from an emotional standpoint, from a really from a mental and emotional standpoint, it made me feel like I was still doing the thing. And I love that about it. And it wasn't about the win conditions, and it wasn't about the outcome. It was about the fight. That's what I was all about. I didn't care which way it went. Just not being in a fight wasn't an option for me. And so incredible conversations. And I would love to ask the Gino here, what do you see, and what do you see the research gaps being right now with respect to this? So I'll kind of qualify the question a little bit more. So we have these veterans that are coming in. They have various degrees of affectation through whatever job they performed while they were overseas or whatever. And they're coming in with various levels of injuries, all this good stuff. Now, is there a rebuttal to the argument that jiu-jitsu is good? And jiu-jitsu is good, and I don't know what methodology you took when you did your research project, and what was the baseline, and how many of those people actually stayed in jiu-jitsu, whereas have we interviewed people that left jiu-jitsu, like veterans, that kind of stuff? Like, do you see research gaps in that area where I actually tried to do jiu-jitsu, but somebody was in my side control and it triggered me? I had a panic attack, whatever the case may be, so that we may set our minds right for receiving those veterans, right?
So that's a great question. It's one of the things that's constantly being addressed, especially in the research field that I'm in. And one of the things that really comes to mind, so in my own personal experience, I had 6 participants that tried it and decided, you know what, it's not for me, right? I don't like someone taking my back. I don't like opening my legs to someone, right? But here's the really interesting part about that, Seb, is that when you take a look at the relationship that individual had with trauma pre-military service, there's
Gotcha.
a connection,
Gotcha. Yeah.
right? And so that's one thing that a lot of folks miss is that trauma is trauma, right? It doesn't matter if it happens when you're 5 years old or you're 35 years old, right? When it stains your soul and your heart and your psychology, right? It's there and it creates a mental model, right? And so when I say mental model, all that means is you have an outward expression of what's going on conscious to your subconscious brain, right? That subconscious part has stuff that is sealed and imprinted with years and years and years of different sorts of neurohormones and lived experiences, interpretations from the prefrontal cortex and what's actually being embodied, right? And how it is that you make meaning of things. So I say all that to say, yes, there is a population of folks who have tried it and it does not work for them. I will also tell you that you will see a correlation with women who do jujitsu who have been sexually assaulted, right? There are some who will not do it, right?
Sure.
There are others that will thrive in it, right? Because wait a minute, I can regain control. I can actually go back and kind of re-script what happened. I mean, it's not going to replace what actually happened, but in the future, I have the confidence to know it'll never happen again, right? So that then you start talking about different things. And I will tell you, on a hardcore scientific perspective, there's studies that need to be done on what we call the HPA axis, right? So the HPA axis is your hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands, and they are directly responsible for the stress response system, right? And so when you're talking about cortisol and epinephrine and norepinephrine, all the adrenaline, all these things that come up, listen, there is such a thing as burnout, right? You can absolutely burn that axis out, and that has a direct tie to hormone production in general, which obviously affects mood and sociability and what you're willing to do and not willing to do. So we are missing data like that, right? That hardcore biological quantitative point. And I think taking a deep dive on the HPA axis is one thing. And then also fMRIs, looking at functional MRIs, folks who start jujitsu and then 6 months later, what their brain looks like. And then 2 years later, what their brain looks like, to see activation points, right? And see, well, is there something happening from a neuroplasticity perspective that's reigniting other areas of the brain or engaging them in a way that helps them cope with things like moral injury, right? Which is part and parcel with folks that are combat veterans. I mean, if you guys haven't had a chance, and this is for everybody, to read the book On Killing by Lieutenant Colonel Dave
It's a great book.
Yes. Read it and reread it, because the nuggets that are in that book about understanding human behavior and the relationship we have with finality, the finality involved with killing another human being, which we're not designed to do, right? But we've been doing it for thousands of years, right? But there's a very real cost there, right? And from a moral injury perspective, that has to be addressed.
Yeah. I have some. So we had initially we're going to have Randy on here. He's a former JTF2 assaulter, and he's a BJJ black or brown belt, and he's a competitor in MMA and done a couple things. And he wasn't able to make it due to some issues. Some family thing came up, but he did leave me with some points here. And I asked him specifically about the benefits of, for veterans and first responders. And these are the things that came up: sense of togetherness and teaming, like being a part of a team, absolutely. Mental and physical resiliency, 100%, and an outlet that offers structure and organizational guidance. And I think this is exactly what we were talking about earlier. And what we've been talking about this whole way through is that, especially the outlet portion. I know that for me, especially, it was a huge outlet that I could actually, as you were saying earlier, I could go all out without hurting anybody or without hurting myself or getting hurt, et cetera, et cetera. Now,
just on that.
Yeah, by all means.
I agree with all of Randy's points. They're excellent. And to tie that into HPA axis, understanding how the adrenal system works, etc. One of the things that I'd like to add is a cautionary tale. And it's not like a scary moment or anything like that. It's just a matter of, it's important that we talk about this, because I believe that it ties directly into the initiative We Defy that Seb has got going now. And I can only assume that as part of that initiative, it is going to not only encourage veterans to engage in BJJ, veterans and first responders as the example, but it will also help educate them in what they're stepping into. before they step into it. So to now Chance's point on, it offered you an outlet. Well, here's what it offered me, an outlet.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is my outlet is scrappy.
Mm-hmm.
So I step onto the mats and some guys come at me hard, and I'm going to freaking come at them hard. And after 15 minutes, my adrenaline, my cortisol, my oxytocin, my everything was burned.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was maxed out. I was seeing white dots because I was going hard. That's what I'm like. I mean, if you come at me hard, you're going to get it harder. And that's just the way it is, because nobody preset the conditions for me to see good success in that moment. If I would have kept going back every night and fighting that hard, my HPA would have been torched. And I was already training hard. I was training for 24-hour solos at that point. So my entire endocrine system was already hammering a little bit. But then throw in that, and it's not a great combination if you combine my natural stubbornness with my natural scrappiness, with guys who were better than me, putting the boots to me. And if I would have continued that for a full month of scrappy do, it's not a positive, it's a negative. Mm-hmm. And so now my point is this very clearly. The importance of We Defy is the educational piece to help explain how to enter into BJJ successfully.
Yes.
That is a great point, and it actually comes up with the next point that I was going to go off of here, which is actually I want to talk about competition, because this is part of it, right? This is the drive to compete, the drive to, if you come at me hard, I'm going to go at you hard. That it's not an innate thing, but there a lot of us really want to dive into competition, right? We want to be able to test ourselves and see what we're capable of. We'll start with Gino here, but did you see a benefit in competition? Did you actually look into that in terms of the science behind why we want to test ourselves, especially in jiu-jitsu?
So two things, right, that come to mind on this one, right? So there's the framing of competition, and especially with beginners, where every day, right, that I roll, I could consider that a competition. And I think most beginners do, right? And when you start to look at more seasoned practitioners, it's a little bit different ball game, right? Because every roll is an opportunity to put myself in a vulnerable position to learn how to work my way out of it, or I tap. And I don't have the ego, right, anymore, because that's been worked out of me. So I don't mind doing that. But in the very beginning, right, when you're just learning how to iron those kinks out and someone's coming at you hard and you're coming at them harder, right? And then figuring out what that equilibrium point is, right, in the roll, that's one thing. Now, with that being said, when you look at someone stepping into like a Naga or a Copa or ADCC, like a competition that's legit, right, one person facing another, I didn't really look into the depths of that from a psychological perspective on what was going on. It was more the daily grind, right, of training and what's happening to behavior over time, right? Because it's a process, just like getting your skill set better of grappling is a process, right? The transformation that happens with a self-knowledge and an understanding, a deeper understanding of me and my lived experience and how I deal with uncomfortable situations. That's the bigger skill set, right, of what's going on with jiu-jitsu, right? It's macro lessons that are taught in a microcosmic way, and little things that give you those nuggets, the keys to unlock why it is that I'm feeling this sort of anxiety, why it is that I'm worked up about this thing, why it is I'm having a hard time at work. Those were the areas that really were highlighted in my work. But I will tell you, the question's fascinating as far as how does like a full-blown competition equate to what's going on as far as preparing for a really big fight, right? I mean, I would assume it's like, doing reconnaissance for a mission, you're getting ready to go out, and it's a big deal. So you better dot your I's and cross your T's and have rehearsed and be ready to rock and roll. So I could definitely see the benefit of that.
For sure. Matt, you've done a lot of competition. What have you noticed in your time in larger tournaments like that? Do you notice a benefit overall in your, not just your psychology or physiology, but like in your daily life within the grind of jiu-jitsu?
Well, when I was a purple belt, I did the pans. I think we discussed this last podcast we did, and I basically just said, like, after you do a tournament like the Pan Championships, it's like one of the biggest ones, you just that level of stress involved in preparing and waiting and going there, and there's tons of people around, best guys from all over the world, and you step in against the best guys. I mean, after you go through that, it's like, aside from MMA or actual war combat, I mean, it's pretty close to like about as stressful as things get. I mean, just one-on-one, people are watching you. You could get injured, blah, 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 all that stuff. So I found after I did that tournament, it kind of increased my bandwidth for stress, and it allowed me to, I was still cooking at the time, and cooking is a very stressful job. I was cooking downtown a hotel, and my job just wasn't stressful anymore after that. I found like people, I'm not going to say people didn't get under my skin, but the daily stress of work at that time, it kind of dissipated, because I felt, I've gone through, that such a tournament, that it kind of increased my tolerance for stress. So I find that competition for me kind of makes life, kind of makes the stressful times in life a lot easier, because really competition is not necessarily so different from day-to-day training, but it's more just, can you manage stress in an uncomfortable situation, an environment that you're not used to? And the analogy that Danaher talks about, how competition is an illusion, and how it's actually no different from what you would be doing every day in the gym, except for you're grappling people you don't know, you're on mats you've never been on, you're in a stadium or an arena that you've never been on. And so if you can cope with that illusion and see it for what it really is, which is it's just jiu-jitsu, but look at it as an illusion, and sort of just look at it as more of a stress management situation than something completely different, that's where I think you can become more effective. So for me, it's definitely allowed me to go through life with a higher tolerance for stress, and it's allowed me to really look at stress management under pressure, and problem solving under a deeper degree of pressure than just daily gym training. It's allowed me to increase my tolerance for that.
Seb, Shaun, you got any thing to add on that?
Yeah, just one thing for me. Excuse me, guys, my throat now is going on here. But anyways, what Matt is referring to right now is perspective, really, right? Like when you get that perspective, because you've been in a place and you have thrived, or you have survived, or you came out of and is stronger on the other end. So this is the concept. It's kind of intertwined in the concept of post-traumatic growth versus post-traumatic stress disorder, or how, anyways, without getting in, because I couldn't get in too much science, but I can just see how this would be extremely beneficial from a sort of stress. I don't like to call it stress inoculation, because you're really not inoculated per se, but you definitely have a heightened level of resistance to it. And this is one of the beauty of jiu-jitsu, is that metaphorical application of the mechanisms that you need to go through life, which is very, very difficult, and how you go about doing that is exactly the same as how you get out of side control, or how you get your back taken and you fight through things. And so for me, there's such a strong metaphorical segue with having the ability to deal with life. I couldn't be more on board with that. Now, I don't know, and again, I'd like to sort of defer to Gino for this a bit, because when I think competition, I'm thinking, is competition an extrapolation of the fundamentally of the fundamentals being mastered, so to speak? So if you're a veteran, you go into a jiu-jitsu gym, you start doing jiu-jitsu, you do everything that you need to be doing, and at some point, it just either by osmosis or just by way of the environment, you now become capable to operate at a certain higher level, or being comfortable with being uncomfortable at that level. Because I'm thinking that that's probably mostly what happens, right? Like it's essentially, fundamentally, you have a certain degree of comfort. As you learn and grow and do all this stuff, I have a higher degree of comfort. So does this hit people differently? We know it does, but how does this relate to, sort of the veteran community?
So I think there's a big distinction there as far as, and to your point earlier, right? Perspective and personality type, right? The kind of individual that we're talking about here. If you look at what it takes to prepare for a very big competition and why it is that I want to choose to compete in the first place. To your point, Seb, if it's this idea of, listen, I've hit a plateau, right? And when you look at it from a scientific perspective, right? So we have this concept that's called allostasis, right? And all of us at any given time have allostatic load, right? It's just stress that we're carrying at any given time. But when you look at what happens for someone who trains consistently, right, for call it 18 to 24 months, and you start knocking on that 3-stripe, 4-stripe, blue belt, maybe even purple belt level, right, of being a practitioner, depending on what school and what academy you're part of, not that there's comfort, right, but there is at the same time, right? You know that you've got the confidence that you've got some skills, right, but at the same time, there's plenty of people on the mat that can teach you some things, right? But once you start getting into that pool, the idea of, so what's next? What's the next step in my evolution and my progression, right, as a practitioner? Because I want to take it there. I will tell you, the majority of folks that I studied and researched, that interest for them, it wasn't so much that, right? But I could absolutely see where that could be a thing over a longitudinal perspective of many, many years. Oh, 110%. And there is a lot of benefit to that. But I think it has to do with the craving, the miss, the need for being back in the fight and actually feeling like I'm in the fight versus just training, right? Mm-hmm. There's a big difference there. Right? It's game on, right? Yeah. There, Matt, to your point, like that stress and what you're feeling, like that, you're in it, right? And that is the fight in of itself. And there's a high associated with it, just like there's a very similar high associated with being deployed and being on target and doing things downrange, right? Mm-hmm. And so there is a bridge there for sure.
Mm-hmm. Consequences, real yes. Consequences.
Yes, yeah. Real consequences. Yeah. Yes,
absolutely.
So in respect to competition, to bring it to a more general perspective, perhaps, and for any veterans who are considering starting BJJ for the first time, or maybe you've been in the game a week and you're thinking about, oh, the boys are talking about competition, maybe I need to do a competition. No, you don't. No one has to do anything in respect to BJJ other than love on it. Mm-hmm. And you've got to find a way to love on it. And maybe your way of loving on it eventually through the evolution of staying in BJJ is now you want to compete. And so what does competing mean in BJJ? Well, that all depends on who you are and how many start lines you've stood on in how many different things in your life. And if this is the first time you're standing on a start line, your first competition in life, it's going to look way different than someone who stood on 1,000 start lines. And so normalizing the abnormal is what we're talking about to some degree. And how to normalize the abnormal within a BJJ competition? Well, it might be a freak show for you if you've never, ever competed before and your coach or your mentor or your guidance or whatever on the mats isn't offering you tools to move through that sort of first-time competition. And so I also want to be careful on this generalization of competition that it's not good for everyone. In fact, it may not be good for 50% of the population. I don't know the science, but this is what I do know. If you are trying to normalize the abnormal and you're not doing it very well, and if this is your first competition ever in your life, as you're standing on the start line, do you know what's happening? Your HPA axis has been crashing all the way up to the start line. Now you're on the start line with a crashed system. When you leave the event, you're crashed because that was overwhelming. May destroy BJJ for you, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the worst case scenario. But the truth lies somewhere in the middle for the first timer who's never competed much. And so it's our job to help someone get to that start line, well prepared, well knowing what they're entering into and how to mitigate some of these challenges pre, during, and post. And so back to the general concept of in competition, these are things that require some thought, some discussion with your coach, some discussion with your peers, some consideration after listening to this, and maybe someone on the panel can add more wisdom to what I just said.
For sure. Before we dive into that, unfortunately, Matt's got to take off real quick here. Do you have any final points? You want to add a little bit onto what Shaun was saying, or anything else you got before you got to run?
Not really. Shaun's absolutely right that that competition isn't for everyone. I actually, when I started doing jiu-jitsu, I wasn't even planning on competing. actually, one of my buddies at the time said, "Hey, like, you're pretty talented. It would be kind of a shame if you never did it." And then I said, "Okay, I guess I'll try it." And then I did it, and I won my first tournament, and I was just like, "Whoa, this is awesome!" And like you guys are talking about with the the dopamine spike and everything, the sense of accomplishment after you finish a tournament, it was like something I never really felt before, and I wanted to chase that high again. I've been chasing it ever since. So for me, it was for me, even though sometimes I don't necessarily love it. I know it brings out the best in me and it makes me better. So that's why I do it. But I know people that have done it and they're just like, you know what, this isn't for me. I want to just train and whatnot. And that's totally fine. There's so many. One thing I love about jiu-jitsu is there's so many avenues you can find through it. You can find friendship, exercise, mental health, a career. For me, it's been a career now, and now I'm trying to explore different avenues to make money off of it and share it and spread it. And that's one thing that I love about jiu-jitsu is there's so many different directions you can take it. And yeah, I totally agree. Do I think everyone who does jujitsu should try it once? Yeah, but I'm biased as a competitor, and honestly, it's not for everyone. Not everyone's going to enjoy it. But I do think in terms of growth and for feeling that stress and for understanding what it's like to go against someone who has been training to win the same competition as you, I think it is it can be very beneficial. But
That's
if
super
you
cool,
know
Matt.
if you know in your heart that like I don't want to do this, I would never say no, you should do it. And I don't grade based on uh competitions or anything like that. I never pressure my students to compete. It's a very personal choice that only the practitioner can make, in my opinion, and it's not for everyone. And I love the conversation that we had, boys. I honestly, I wish I could stay longer, but I do have a hockey game that I got to go play right now. And
Stupid hockey.
I know I actually am just getting back into it now. I've been taking years off because of jujitsu, and I played the other night, and it's so fun, and maybe a topic for another time. I've actually been going back and trying to have that white belt mindset where I'm trying to learn hockey all over again, kind of like a Kaizen mindset. I've been really doing a lot of studying on YouTube and seeing some huge mistakes that I was making when I was a kid playing hockey. So I'm trying to, just like I take that from jiu-jitsu, I take it into hockey, and I'm trying to become a better player. And yeah, so wish me luck, but it's been a great conversation. I hope you guys will have a great conversation after I leave and have me back again. Thank you so much.
For sure. Appreciate it, Matt.
Cool,
And
Matt.
how
Thanks, Matt.
Canadian is that, right? Like, oh, I got to end this conversation to go play
A little
hockey.
too Canadian, I'm thinking.
Right? About the most Canadian thing I can imagine. Sorry, I'm tying my skates right now. I got to run. Right?
Yeah.
Sorry to disappoint you, boys, but I got to go play hockey.
Yeah, I got to go grab the beers, boys. Sorry.
Got to get the beers. Yeah. All right. Well, this actually it plies into what I want to talk about next, which is how we apply jiu-jitsu to life. Because we'll see you later, Matt. Appreciate it. The application of life itself, I think there are, there's almost a direct correlation, and everything that I've seen in being a veteran, being a dad, being just a human being, learning new skill, all these things I've seen application into it. But is there any science behind it? Let's ask that right off the bat.
So, without going too deep into the weeds, right? So there is this concept that we have. It's called the biocultural synthesis. Have you guys ever heard of that before?
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, right. So it's this idea that culture has a direct relationship with your biology, and biology has a direct relationship with culture. Now, what do we mean by culture? Right? That's such a loaded word that gets thrown around like crazy, right? It's what you do, how you do it, who you do it with, and what it means to you, right? And so when you break down what is happening, to your point, Chance, on the mat, right, and how it is that there is a relationship to life every single day, right, with the struggles and the trials and the tribulations and confusion and ambiguity. And that is like the key word right here when I'm talking about the biocultural synthesis is ambiguity, right? The brain despises, right, having ambiguity. It does not like being confused. Its job is to make sense of your environment immediately, right, to help keep you alive. And it wants to do it as efficiently as possible so it doesn't go through a high caloric burn, right? That's just survival, right? It wanted to preserve your body as best as it can. So when you look at this idea of being comfortable with the uncomfortable, right? When someone takes my back, and the difference of me freaking out and flailing and trying to get out versus I know what he's going to do. I know what his next move is, right? And I know what my next move needs to be. The confidence that comes along with that, the biological ramifications of that confidence to keep you calm and not have that HPA axis dump right then and there. It gives you a sense of agency, power, and control of when it makes sense to truly go into fight or flight and when it does not. And that is a direct correlation to confidence and knowing that, listen, I know what I'm capable of. I know what to expect, which means that I don't have that ambiguity anymore. So now we start talking about life equilibrium. And when life is throwing stuff my way, what's the appropriate reaction? What is the appropriate response, right? Cooler heads prevail. All right, well, how do you achieve a cooler head in the midst of stress? Well, if I am going and putting myself in a situation that's always uncomfortable and I can stay calm on that in a very physical, primal sense, all the other stuff in life starts to get a lot easier, right? Mm-hmm. Because we have the tools now to make better sense of what's going on, right? So the big scientific correlation there at a broad stroke is that biocultural synthesis and what is being acquired culturally, right? For me as a person and the biology that's behind it.
And that's
go ahead,
sorry
sir.
about that. That's really no different from a fundamental perspective than having somebody knowing where they fit in the hierarchy, for example, right? Like say at work, if I'm the go-to person or whatever the case may be, then my stress level is reduced substantially, which allows me to control chaos better. Yes. So it's actually, I mean, you know, it's kind of a question, but kind of a statement. I believe it's pretty much the same.
I would agree
mechanism,
with you.
Right?
Yes, 110%, right? But it's the way in which that mechanism is delivered and conditioned and understood, right? Especially in a post-combat life. That shifts the playing field in a very big way. Right? Having that exposure and then making sense of it, right? What's the appropriate response in a situation like this? This is what my go-to is, but does it mean that it's socially acceptable? Which now we start talking about norms and blending and fitting in and identity management, all the other stuff that comes along with it.
Sure.
Yeah. Any thoughts on this, Shaun? You're awfully quiet in the corner.
Yeah, you know, I love learning, man. So I'm just trying to absorb as much as I can while not trying to directly interject with my own thoughts. So what am I thinking? Well, applications to life. I think to Gino's point and to Seb's point, you know, hierarchical understanding of where you fit into the culture around you is important. It gives you clarity. And without that clarity, without that wisdom of how you fit into society, now you're left guessing. And guessing is an uncomfortable place to be. Yeah. And so it doesn't matter where you are within the culture or within the society. You could be at the lowest rung, whatever that means. It's a goofy term, but it'll establish the conceptual notion. You could be at the lowest rung and you'll be okay if you know that's where you are and that's where you belong and there's a path forward up the ladder. It's when you're unaware of where you are, you're unaware of what's going on around you, and you're unaware of the path forward, that there's that dissonance, that non-synchronized path in life. And so if you can step onto the mat on the first night as a new white belt, through We Defy, you understand what the expectations are. You're going to understand it's a careful introduction. You're going to understand you're safe. You're going to understand you've got mentors. You're going to understand there's blah, 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 the path forward. Once you know all of those things and you step onto the mat, as long as all those preconditions are in place, now you can trust the process. Mm-hmm. Now you can step into a comfortable environment knowing that not quite everything's taken care of, but it's not going to be a full freak show. And so if you're uncomfortable with who you are within the society around you, and then someone throws you a shovel full of freak show, it could be a little bit much. Mm-hmm. And so if something like We Defy establishing a framework for you to step into and being carefully introduced to the freak show, well, now that's a whole different thing. So the applications to life for BJJ as the example is through a We Defy organization looks way different than you just randomly saying, I'm going to go learn BJJ. I don't even know how to spell it. I should be okay. You might not be, depending
true.
on the kind of person that you are, the kind of gym that you're stepping into, and the outcome or expectations that you may have. As an example, if you're a veteran and maybe you're a confident and capable veteran, but you never did much martial arts, but you think in your head, I'm an ass kicker. And then you go out on those mats for the first time, you get turned inside out, folded upside down,
By
and
a
get thrown out
librarian.
on the sidewalk, and you're still dizzy from it. And you don't know what just happened. You've got zero context. All you know is you got your ass kicked and you're not a badass anymore. And for some characters, that can be a little much. It may ruin BJJ for them. So the application to life for BJJ is like anything in life. You've got to step into it with an open mind. You've got to absorb the moment for what it is. You've got to go home, think about it a little bit, and then you've got to adjust accordingly as you move forward. If you can do all of that by yourself, but it's better if you can learn these lessons in a construct called something like We Defy, so that you can now apply positive lessons within your life.
Yeah, so that's within a controlled environment, essentially, right? Where parameters are controlled. There's so much good stuff here. Like, one of the things that we haven't spoken about that's closely tied into all of this is actually being honest with yourself, and the mats are the place to do it. You don't have a choice. You will be exposed. And so there is, in speaking to the trust that's being built amongst your practitioner, aside from the fact that they release the hole where they could kill you, and they do it so they don't hurt you, which increases the trust factor, but also having to expose my every weakness to everybody to see without a single place to hide is the absolute best thing you can do to address those shortcomings.
It's the best thing, but sometimes the hardest thing.
100% it is.
Yeah.
100% it is. So to this point, Shaun, and I think the point that you're making that I really like is that we need to be preemptively front-loading that information into their brain so that they have a reference point when they hit the mats. This is what it feels like. This is what's likely to happen. This is how you are not going to win. This is how you are going to feel claustrophobic maybe at times. Or this is how, and so triggering mechanisms aside, because that's a completely different ball game. I'm just talking about fundamentally, they need to have that awareness that those are the things that are, so when they actually experience it and they go, holy shit. Well, I remember Seb or whoever was speaking about this with me prior to me starting. So now, I have something to relate this on, and I can move forward from there. But not having that is not, it's kind of like one of the things we do very well in policing, getting people in policing without preparing them for policing, right?
Yeah.
And next thing you know, they're out, their brain is blown up, and they talk to an experienced person, and I'm like, no, this is normal. Like, I've gone through this a million times. So is this other guy and this other guy. It's normal what you are feeling, acknowledge it, move on. Let's do the things, keep monitoring, do those things. But if we had the preemptive conversation long before these guys even enter, and we weren't trying to jack up the numbers by, recruiting actively, and to recruit actively, we are going to skip over this little part here, which is called policing. And you can't do that. We know it's backfiring. Like, we can't do that. It doesn't work. So I'm 100% on board with that. Having the right sort of startup package where they actually get all of that information, they can refer to it, and they have a genuine conversation, and then perhaps encouraging the instructors that are receiving the veterans to actually inform themselves about, what it means to be a veteran, whether some of the challenges or whatever the case may be, to really have a symbiotic approach to the We Defy project.
Yeah, I find this to be more exciting than a lot of things that I've seen come on to the Canadian BJJ front, and it's for this very reason, that it is the opportunity to create a two-way dialogue between veterans first responders and everyone else on the mat, be it an instructor or another white belt or a purple belt or whatever. It's immaterial. It's the opportunity to create a learning moment where everyone gets to know each other a little bit better through concerns and qualifications and outcomes and negatives and positives and all of that good stuff. It's just a great opportunity to talk about the things that aren't being talked about as openly as they could be.
You know, it's a really good point. I will tell you guys, this past year, I went to the annual gala that the We Defy Foundation has. And when I tell you guys that I was nothing short of just in awe of how many participants came and shared their story and their testimony, and their families came with them, right? Of just how much of an impact it had made, jiu-jitsu had made in their life due to the opportunities that were brought to the table by We Defy. But also, more importantly, to both your points, the conversations that were had in the very beginning about expectation management. But the most important expectation is the expectation that they have of themselves, right? And this persona of yes, high speed and doing all these things, but you're getting ready to step into a realm of combat that is not, right, the same of what is it you're used to. It's still combat, but you're going to get humbled, right? And everybody does, right? That is the thing of having humble pie, right? But to your point, it is so important to set and plant those seeds at a very early stage to really encourage authenticity. And that's one of the biggest things, I think, in the martial arts in general, right? There's so much inauthenticity. And the UFC has done a really good job at snuffing out, right, over time, what's authentic and what's not. But more importantly, I'm talking about the character of the individual and getting caught up with one's own rank and their history and all this other stuff, as opposed to talk to me about you as a human being, right? How solid are you as a person? How honest are you with others, and more importantly, with yourself about what's going on? Except to your point, jiu-jitsu doesn't give you an opportunity to lie. It just doesn't, right? It will beat it out of you, like without a doubt.
It's very liberating. You know, I find it to be extremely liberating. It's kind of like getting rid of when I say getting rid, I mean accept the fear of death, for example. Like once you've stood in front of a door long enough and be like, when I take a step inside that house, I'm dead. Once you've done that a couple times, everything else is a downgrade from that, because ultimately the body is an extremely conservative machine and it's all about survival. So every single thing that comes up, you know, triggers those responses. So I find even though it's daunting to actually expose your weaknesses, it's truly the only way to achieve and optimize your level of success in any endeavor. And you have to do it. There is no other way around it.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I really love about it, and it goes to what you guys are saying, is the fact that it's a language, right? I can now communicate with other people outside of my community or outside of the imagined community of veterans or military or whatever. I get to communicate with somebody else from outside of that community, inside my own community. And then I get to create a new community within another community, right? And so as a vet, I can now sit down on mats with, you know, an accountant and a lawyer and a police officer and whatever, right? And we can all speak the same language without having to explain ourselves, without having to fall back on, oh, well, I used to be whatever. None of that matters. It's all one language and we all understand it. And one of the tricks, you know, when you first get out is we start to isolate here in Canada, especially because we have such a small veteran community and such a vast nation that, you know, it can be real easy to just, well, nobody understands me. I'm not gonna talk to people, right? Oh, I don't want to, as you said earlier, you know, those white coats wouldn't understand. But when you're on the mats and everyone's wearing a gi, we all understand.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And that feeds into another concept. Sorry, Chance. That feeds into another concept, which is the concept of I'm the only one going through this here, and which couldn't be further from the truth. Every street corner, there's somebody going through your challenges, and then every other street corner, they're going through worse challenges than yours. And so we need to stop making this, you know, and this is what leads people to not want to seek help if they have like mental and emotional, you know, challenges or whatever, because it's all about like, I'm the only one, or I'm the one that's experiencing this. Everybody has it together, of course. It's compounded by the fact that everybody lives a life on social media. So then when you look left and right, all you see is, you know, Pleasantville. And when we know that's not the case, but
absolutely,
it's very interesting.
And that's a really important point, Seb, because going back to the concept earlier of identity management, right? Managing who it is that I am in my place in this world, right? And what I'm using as a comparative reference on a regular basis. Look, these things, right? Like, they're great little tools, but they're not at the same time. Yeah, that's exactly right. I'd love to nothing more than chuck mine in the ocean. But there's a conditioning process that has happened, right, for society at large. And when you take a look at what the opportunity cost is of that conditioning process, what have we traded, right? We have traded saving of time, or so we think, right, and efficiency, right, for massive, massive gaps, right, in our ability to have a true and authentic relationship with ourselves, which means that I have to look at myself in the mirror and really be honest instead of going through this scroll, right? And all of a sudden I'm getting these shots of dopamine, and then I get kind of excited and I see what's going on with this person in their life here and that person here. Or I get stressed, right? I get stressed out by watching it because, wow, they're here and I'm not there. Like, I'm so far behind in life than what they are. And to your point, 99.9% of the time it's a facade.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So that is a huge, huge component where I think jiu-jitsu really offers a very, very fruitful taste of reality of no. That's not real life. This right here, right now, this is real life, right? Yeah. And this is where you plug in, and this is the most constructive way to do it because you're using mind, body, spirit, everything at that moment in time and having that authentic exchange with another human being.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I had to tell myself this at one point was that social media was they're catch-ups. Like when you meet an old friend, what do? You catch up. What are those? Those are highlights, right? Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I went on vacation and my kids grew up. Now they're school, blah, blah, blah. That's what social media is all the time. Mm-hmm. And so I always put it through that lens. But so we got a few questions. We got a bunch of questions here actually from the audience, and I want to start going through them. Does anybody have any final points on We Defy or on jiu-jitsu in general? I mean, we'll get into some of this stuff, but
well, the topic were we just covering there was about developing as an individual. Is that what we were kind of summing up on? I'll just throw this out for the veterans out there, maybe, and probably first responders to some degree. I haven't really thought about it, but I suspect there's some similarities. There's a segment of veterans out there that, for whatever reason, it might be institutional, it might be they feel like they got done wrong, or that one time that one master corporal said one thing bad to them, and they're still hanging on to that, or whatever the case is.
Master corporal.
Yeah, all of the bad stuff, quote unquote. And so now they're kind of like an angry veteran, we'll call it. For whatever reason, it doesn't matter. They just got done wrong. And so they're going through life for several years angry. Chest is puffed out. They got the T-shirt that is inflammatory. They got the bumper stickers that are inflammatory. They're all about pushing buttons, but they can't push a button because they don't have the skill sets, because they're insecure, they're uncomfortable with who they are, they're just angry, and they haven't figured it all out yet. And so you go out on the mats, and that'll get figured out for you. Because it doesn't matter how angry you are, it doesn't matter how many bumper stickers you've got, you're going to get choked out.
Yeah.
And so that's going to change your game. You get to decide at that moment, am I the tough guy that I think I am? Am I the veteran that I tell myself I am? Or did that 16-year-old girl just choke me out? Yeah, I think that just happened. Then they get to go home and get right with it. And that's the branching point. That's the delineating point on that individual's path after that first night, when they face themselves in a way that they've never seen before. Mm-hmm. And it's our job, specifically maybe We Defy's job, to help that individual move through that moment where literally you could flip a coin and it could be heads or tails onto positive, negative outcome in one night. Because they showed up with predisposed anger, we'll call it. So as part of the conversation, before a guy or a girl goes there with those kind of issues, there needs to be a pre-discussion on how to set them up for success, so that at the end of that first night, they're not scratching their heads thinking, I hate everything even more, or whatever.
That's funny. One of the things that I really like to do, excuse me, with humans when I do either a guest speaking appearance or anything like that, is to tell them what is going to offend them, so make sure that they're not getting offended. I call that the flank. It's like if you say something completely outrageous, they will right away be offended. But if you tell them they will be offended, humans are contrarian by nature. They'll be like, no, I'm not offended, right? so what I like to, it's kind of the same with the jiu-jitsu piece. So when we're teaching these people to go and hit the mats, and we're preloading what I believe are conditions that are necessary for them to be truly successful, we do so preemptively. We tell them, this is not going to feel like something positive necessarily, but it is going to be transformational for you. This is where everything changes. And it's the best way, in my opinion, and in my experience, when I'm teaching, say, leadership courses, because everybody is the best leader. We all know that. Everybody is. Nobody needs improvement in their leadership skills. And so what I often say is, I'm not here to teach you leadership. I'm here to conduct an introspection into our own leadership. And regardless of what we're speaking about right now and how applicable it is to you, the idea is not to be defensive about it, but to see it as a transformational point, like a tipping point. This is where things change. This is where I regain control. So reframing that. So anyways, a long convoluted answer.
No, that's critical.
Yeah.
That's great, though. No, that's really good, Seb. That's really good.
Perfect. It goes directly into the first question I wanted to ask from the audience, which is actually kind of hilarious. But it comes from Winterstorm427. A question for Seb. Given his previous career and level within it, what does he think we can do to get this not only up and running, but a priority in an organization of 20,000 members? So I'm assuming he's talking about jiu-jitsu, but what are your thoughts, Seb?
And I'm also thinking he's talking about the RCMP because there's no other force in this country.
Could be, perhaps.
So I have some good and bad news. So the good news is that the RCMP is already on board with the BJJ curriculum, and that is why the skills, what do you call them? The block training and just the recertification process is now engaged in a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu type curriculum, which in my opinion is great. I mean, we're falling short of what I think should happen, which is having a MMA based curriculum. This is what I think should happen, but I'm not making the calls. And there's also some risk mitigation with injury mitigation, that type of things that need to happen. And that's above my pay grade. But I will say this. Every time that you look at the totality of the circumstances and you are wondering how you can affect external changes, generally it starts with internal changes. If each and every single one of us is focused on us and be the best version of us as we possibly can and proliferate the love instead of like sort of looking at everybody that's not training and be judgmental and doing certain things, continue to just love on the jiu-jitsu, as Shaun would say, and continue to proliferate it positively, maybe, asking for friends to come and try and do a watch training, training day or whatever the case may be, and make sure that you use techniques and tactics and procedures that are applicable to law enforcement, that kind of stuff. So there's a relatability that can be built upon there. And so for me, I never really worry about this person, that person, and this other person. What am I actually doing to be a positive representation of what jiu-jitsu can do for you in policing? And I would say that at the top of this, operational readiness. So once it is the time to take actions in the context of policing, make sure that you do so with the utmost professionalism and that you do so with the skills that you have acquired. And that's going to do more for the proliferation of the art than going out and trying to bang on everybody that doesn't do it.
Yeah, it's great.
Language is super important in these kind of things when you're launching a new initiative and trying to encourage a new initiative. It's just life in general. And it's that classic case whenever you're looking at an institution in front of you, using two different words. One would be, you've all got to do BJJ, versus, guess what? We get to do BJJ.
Totally. Yeah.
Totally different message. And it's usually the former that is being delivered rather than the latter.
Sure. Yeah.
And so not only does it need to be reframed as, dudes, we get to, it's got to be done by the right person.
That's true.
Because if it's a person who's up there, and they've never been on the mats, you get hooked off the stage left. There you go. You're gone. You're the wrong person. So it's got to be the right person at the right time with the right message.
Sure.
That's a great point. Yeah. So we got the next question here. Again, Winterstorm is, is there something to the constant pressure of someone pressing against you? I know people with anxiety feel comfort with weighted blanks, etc. Says therapy through aggressive, sustained hugging. What do you think, Gino?
So there's a thing there, right? Like without a doubt, right? The aggressive hugging, that's a good one, but in a very real sense, right? Again, so human beings, right? We crave for connection. We do, right? Even for those folks who say that I'm a lone wolf and I do my own thing,
They're afraid of being hurt.
that's exactly right, right? And so we crave it. So having it, even though it's through an aggressive medium, right? At the end of the day, we also know that, to Seb's point, it's controlled, right? So yes, I am in this moment. We are quote unquote in the fight, but we know that there are rules to this fight. So right now, when we're going through this process, right, and I'm dealing with all the different thoughts that I'm trying to control and just kind of tone down the noise here and let my body do what it needs to do and just truly be in the moment. Like one of the things that I talked a lot about in my research is this Japanese concept of mushin, right? No mind, having no mind in that moment, just completely suspending all thought and let what's going to happen and what you have trained and conditioned your body to do, let it do it, right? That takes a certain level of confidence and a deeper level understanding, again, going back to having an authentic relationship with oneself. But to this question, as far as that constant pressure of someone pressing against you, it absolutely 110% goes back to that idea of vulnerability and having this close proximity, and that there's another human body that's touching me, and we're going through this battle together. But at the same time, I can't do it without you pressing up on me, and you can't do it without me pressing up on you. So now we have a dependency factor, right? And a lot of people, like, again, going back to, being a lone wolf, I'm independent. Right? You don't get through life independently, right? You get through life with dependable relationships and the right people in your tribe that you can depend on.
100%.
Yeah. I heard.
Well, I'd like to push back a little bit,
and I'll give you a second to push back on that. I heard an anthropologist point at one point was that the birth of civilization was she postulated that it wasn't the development of agriculture, but it was when they found the first femur that had been healed. In that they were no longer just surviving on their own. That means that person was taken care of by the community.
Yes, I do recall that. And yeah, you're 100% right.
Yeah. So, Shaun, you want to push back on that? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's not a strong pushback. I'm just offering a different opinion. How about that? Just on the, I'm not going to say it was an overgeneralization. It was a generalization that has merit, of course, as a generalization. But the fact remains that an individual can operate independently and still be successful. The fallout of that is if you're operating independently, you're not improving the team. And so I do believe that there are lone wolves, we'll call them Ronin, that can be successful. But the shortcoming in that aspect is they're not developing the broader team around them, which is a failure, which is a lost opportunity. And so if you're out there listening to this right now thinking that you're a Ronin and you don't need to play that team game and blah blah blah, etc., BJJ ain't for me because I don't need other people. Well, maybe that's true, but those other people need you.
See,
So
I have a
go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick thing on that for me. I think what Gino was referring to is optimizing success. Whereas, yes, you can be successful, and yes, you can make it. But I mean, let's take a very, very possible scenario of just you got diagnosed with cancer all of a sudden. You're stage 4, and you have, it's kind of how is and this is a very specific example, and it doesn't have to be linked to such a specific example, but you're gonna go through life needing nobody until you need everybody. And if you haven't worked at those relationships, if you haven't built those relationships, if you haven't invested in the collective, as Shaun points out, and for them to invest back in you, yes, you may be successful, but you are on a timeline. There is going to be a time where you need someone.
Yeah.
I agree. I just wanted that point out there because I do think it's kind of important.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna add to that as well, Shaun and Seb. So, and Shaun, from a contextual perspective, right? So this idea of dependency. So if you go back into some of the psychological literature that goes back to 40s and 50s, and we start talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And that baseline of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? The first need is physiological, right? So we've got to have proper temperature, food, water, so on and so forth to survive as a species in order to achieve self-actualization or work our way up to self-actualization. So I say that to say, when you think about a newborn baby, right? A newborn baby it's a human being, but it cannot achieve those physiological needs on its own. It's depending on another human being straight out the womb. So now you have a subconscious mental model of dependency. Even though it's incredibly primary, it's still there, right? So we can go through the life course and say, I'm independent and I don't need anybody. But at the same token, there is a component within that always is yearning for that sort of connection. It's just what has come along the way from a mental model perspective in your life that pushes you farther and farther away from it, or not, right? But it is something that it has been studied very much in depth in the sense of the dependency factor on the other. And it is important, right? But you do raise a very good point as well. But I do want to provide that additional context because it's a good reference for folks who are tuning in to look into as well.
Yeah, you're right. And so to the individual who doesn't feel that anymore, that connection, we'll call it, at some point in their life, they forgot it.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
Yeah.
It's immaterial what it is, but they just don't have it a 10 out of 10 like they used to when they were a baby. So now it's a 2 out of 10. So that individual can go through life at a 2 out of 10 and never doing BJJ or never doing anything, being the lone wolf, blah, 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 whatever.
Yep.
But now we're talking about the advantages of stepping into BJJ. If you're a 2 out of 10, guess what? Be prepared to become that cool baby again who loves on people and gets to connect. Because some people are missing that connection. And social media doesn't give it. Sometimes your hockey team doesn't give it. There's lots of things that don't give it. But if you can use BJJ as an opportunity, a new tool that'll give it to you, for sure, it's a thing that is going to turn your 2 out of 10 to at least a 3 out of 10.
Yeah.
To that point,
improvement. Yeah, go ahead, Gino.
No, I was going to say to that point, Shaun, when you take a look at the difference that exists between social media and social capital, right? They're not the same thing. And a lot of people nowadays think they are the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Social capital has everything to do with the quality and depth of relationships you have with other folks that can be resources and are beneficial to your life. Social media is a facade of what that's supposed to be and what it's supposed to mean, right? But again, the authenticity factor of being honest with ourselves, right? And where we are at in life and the relationships that we choose to entertain and what we do with our time. There's a big disconnect that has happened, right? Jiu-Jitsu gives you a medium, though, that is authentic social capital, right? Because those bonds, the way that they are formed, has everything to do with fundamental pillars of having a relationship between one human being and another. There's struggle, there's strife, there's happiness, there's wins, there's joys. Everything is experienced in a microcosmic controlled environment, which is incredibly powerful.
100%. And in a heightened neurological state.
Oh,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Which makes it even more impactful.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I got to go to the washroom quick, guys.
Okay.
Dude, how weak.
So we got another couple questions here, and we'll carry on with those while he is having to run off to the little boys' room. We got Hundred08 says, speaking of injuries, is BJJ a big injury producer, specifically ligaments, joints, and muscles? And then he adds, also, is there a gentle BJJ, a Tai Chi of BJJ? What do you think, Doc?
So I will tell you, having been on both ends of that, right? There was a season of my life where I trained super hard, right? And I was doing a lot of judo combined with jiu-jitsu. And yeah, man, I got pretty tore up. I mean, separated AC joint, torn bicep, knees jacked up, cracked ribs, and take your pick, right? Yeah. But older, wiser, right? You start to appreciate the value of flow rolling, right? Yeah. And limiting hard rolls to maybe, 1 day a week or 1 day every couple of weeks, if that. But, when you're a young man and stout and you want to get rocking and rolling, yeah, man, that's it definitely comes with injuries, right? Now, I will say, because of the low impact of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specifically, is it do you see it as prevalent like in judo, right? I will tell you, I saw way more gnarly injuries in judo than I do in jiu-jitsu, right? But knee issues are a very common thing in jiu-jitsu, shoulder issues as well, neck issues. But you don't have that high impact of the earth hitting you, right, when you're getting thrown and tossed on your head. So is there such a thing as Tai Chi Jiu-Jitsu? I would consider that to be flow rolling in my world, but Seb would probably be the authority to speak to that, not me.
Well, we're going to put you on the fire, Seb. What do you think? Is there...
Yeah, I mean, yes, there are some common injuries in jiu-jitsu that can, be overused injuries, or perhaps even if you're starting later in life, those types of things, because we all have our dings, from life itself. And so you show up on the mats, if you have, it might get exacerbated slightly through jiu-jitsu over time. But you have to look at the cost benefit here. My knee is bugging me a little bit, or I was sitting on the couch, like dwelling on things or doing certain things. I mean, ultimately the life is finite. Like, it stops, it ends at some point. And so it is normal that along the way we get dinged up, and those are badge of honors, really. I mean, it's all about injury mitigation as far as I'm concerned. So yes, if there are certain things that are bugging me, like my neck's bugging me or whatever, I will let my partners know. So you have those honest conversations instead of being like, no, I can just roll, normally, and let your ego get in the way. You really have those conversations and try to mitigate some of those issues. But if you want to be completely uninjured, get yourself in and I'm not suggesting that that's the case, they're 108, but if somebody was, then they need to bubble wrap themselves and stay on the couch, and they make sure that, they have the proper nutrition, the proper exercise, because they'll get a jammer in their bubble wrap. But it's just, yes, it can be a byproduct. As far as like injury ratios, from what I have seen as a club owner, I would say that most of the people that got injured severely in jiu-jitsu, or the people that engage in jiu-jitsu that were once injured severely were injured in soccer, So you have that. It's actually the injury rates, and I can speak for myself. In 17 years, I have very few injuries from BJJ. Very few.
Yeah. For sure. Shaun, we got...
BJJ injuries. The biggest cause of BJJ injuries, any guesses? Oh, it's me.
Yeah,
I cause my own injuries.
That's a fact.
And so, have I been injured? Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Because I caused them myself, for either over aggressive or over eager, or in the game too hard, or too many hours in one night, or my mindset, or whatever it is. The biggest injury producer is me. The second biggest injury producer is the culture of the gym that you're in. If you're in a cool
100%.
club, guess what? Get a grip on yourself, join a cool club. BJJ injuries are in the rearview mirror. Now, life is hard. There's going to be some bumps and bruises. You'll pick up some injuries, but they're all things that you can work through. I've got lots of injuries. I've been injured in BJJ. I've managed to work through all of them. I can still do my thing. And here's one of the cool things about BJJ, speaking of injuries. If you do get injured, it's now your job to find a way to navigate through that injury, or around that injury, or over that injury, or under that injury. You get to adapt based on the dumb decisions that you made for being the idiot that injured yourself. It's a learning process where you learn to modulate your life on a daily basis on the mats. And at the end of it, 1 year, 2 years, 7 years, 12 years later, whatever the case is, as you grow through the art, at some point into it, you're going to figure out the right balance for you. You'll show up on day one and not know what it is, but by day X, you'll have figured that out. When I first showed up to BJJ, I was there to scrap. I like scrapping. Now, I don't care about scrapping at all. In fact, I'm not looking for a scrap. I don't actually care for the fight. I showed up for the fight. Now I show up not to fight. And so there's a lot of people who understand that already if they've been in the game long enough. But if you don't understand that statement, you need to be in the game to understand what it means. So get in the game, get your fight out of you, start loving on not fighting, and you'll love on BJJ.
Love it.
Yeah,
One thing
that's a great point.
One thing I'd like to add with this, a great inject there, is be very mindful also of your brain playing tricks on you. You know, like, oh, I would start this and it potentially has a lot of benefits for me, but I won't because, you know, I don't want to get injured. Because the brain will trick us into giving us these great ideas and what we think are dogmatic sort of, you know, approach to life. You know, this is an incontrovertible truth, so to speak, that I will get injured. And because we will do that. And you will essentially talk yourself out of it by listening to some people that have said, oh, you know, I've tried this and I got injured. It's done. I'm done, you know. So you really have to have the ability for critical analysis when it comes to stuff like this, because otherwise you could easily justify not doing something that's excellent for you on account of the byproduct that may come with.
Yeah.
Sorry, I did fail to say, I said the biggest cause of injury is me, but the subunit within me called the ego, that's actually the biggest culprit. That's the one that causes all the problems. That's the one that causes the injuries. That's the one that you need to get a grip on. On the first night, you're either going to stick around and play the long game, or you're going to bust out because your ego was so fragile that you don't want to go for a second night. And so you've got to face your own ego in that first session. You might not get a boo-boo, but you'll get a boo-boo.
Yeah, there will be injury somewhere. I love that. So we're almost at 2 hours, boys. I first off, I can't thank you guys enough. Gino, Seb, Shaun, this has been a fantastic conversation. We have, as Shaun likes to say, we have just scraped the surface of what jiu-jitsu has to offer, and we're going to talk about it some more on another day here, but this has been outstanding. Any final thoughts, Doc, on jiu-jitsu, the benefits, psychological, physical, any of those giant subjects?
Absolutely,
any final thoughts on them?
You know, so one of the just from a high level, right? The consistency factor, right? Jiu-jitsu offers you an outlet that is a consistent dose of reprieve as well as reframing, right? And when I say reframing, meaning when I interpret what stress is, what trauma is, what the value of relationships are, what the value of trust is, right? And the value of communication. Truthfully, when you look at someone who values the warrior ethos, who values being in the fight and what it meant to them at one time, right? You can still carry that with you into that next chapter, right? With that, I will say, and going back to the jiu-jitsu not being for everyone, and look, that's okay. There's plenty of other modalities that exist, but the benefits of jiu-jitsu are undeniable, right? If it is for the right person, for the right reasons, it changes lives, right? And I'm not talking about the competition or the skill set. It's what it does in here and what it does here. That is just, it's priceless, right? It really is priceless. So that would be the tidbit. I mean, obviously, if you guys want to do deep dives, my work is available on the internet. By all means, go for it. Shoot me an email, and we can ask questions back and forth. So that's anyone listening. I'm happy to talk to anybody about this.
You'll have to hit me up with some links, and I will put them in the show notes. So if anybody's watching, they can go directly there, and that's good to go. Seb, any final thoughts?
Yeah, for me, I mean, everything's been said. I think most of my athletes and the people that have started jiu-jitsu later in life, or people that started jiu-jitsu when they started jiu-jitsu, there's the one common theme seems to always be, I wish I started earlier. I wish I started earlier. So the best time to start something was yesterday. The next best time is today. So instead of, you know, because now we're going to have a bunch of people armed with some very, very important knowledge on how to navigate the waters of jiu-jitsu. And if you let it fade away in 2 days, you'll never sign up. You'll never go in. You'll never test it. So if you're on fire right now, put your boots on and find a place to go. Get it done. Beat the iron while it's hot.
Yeah. And there are lots of places out there. Lots of places out there. Like it's an exploding art. So if you should be able to find somewhere close, and if not, it's worth the travel, I would say. Shaun, any final thoughts?
Do yourself a favor. If you've never been on the mats before, go hit the mats. If you're concerned how to do that, hit up Seb. If you want to know the organization that you're going to do it with, We Defy. I think I'll finish with that.
That's great. Winterstorm added this great point right at the end here. Awesome group and panel. Singularly, we are good. Together, we are great. And I think that is, it sums it up pretty well. I can't thank y'all enough. If you haven't already, I just want to make sure that you guys, you like the page, you subscribe, you hit the notification bell. I'm going to keep harping on this so that you can keep in the know, because we're going to do this every day. So if I got nothing else for you, if anybody else got anything else, I think today we have been able to, better understand jiu-jitsu. We've learned more about it. We can build our idea of it, and we can grow together within it. So make sure you get out there, hit the mats, and do that thing. We'll talk to y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.
Chimo.